So how are you feeling? Are you exhausted? Or are you inspired and kind of revved up? Are you ready to get a glass of wine? All of the above, perhaps?
Caffeinated?
Oh, well, when we thought about how we wanted to close, we definitely wanted to get everybody together to close this. And we wanted to end on a note that talked about looking forward and looking into the future. As we've talked about, the new generation of things that we're seeking for non-surgical fertility control are a bit off. And I think we've cut a bit in the future. And so we wanted to take a look into the future. When I thought about how to do that and who to involve, I automatically thought about Betsy Saul. Betsy has been on our board since 2005, I think, and has become one of my best friends. And when I think of Betsy, I think of somebody who really is a kind of a, one of the things we've loved about her on the board is she's a really good strategist, and she tends to kind of look at things from a 10,000, 20,000 foot view, and that's particularly been in the animal health field. You know, she's a serial innovator, which I love. She, in inventing and co-founding petfinder.com, she really reinvented a business model for how pets in dogs and cats and other animals in this country and others kind of move through shelters and into homes. And she's doing that again with Heel House Call veterinarians. So I think that's a really good perspective to bring to a new model that we're going to need to invent as we go forward to change fertility control and how we can best deliver it. So we thought about looking into the future with some of these futurists, and I thought of Betsy. And at the time, we also thought we were actually going to have Amy Gilbreth with us. Now, many of you know Amy. She's the executive director of Found Animals Foundation. And she's a business consultant in her past and has, with Found Animals, done some fascinating innovation-related things with including an incubator of new animal health businesses. So she's very much also looking into new business models. Well, she's also incubating something else, Amy is, and determined that at her 5.5 months of pregnancy was at kind of last minute not able to travel for this trip. So she sent her best, and Betsy agreed to take this as a solo venture, which she'll do a wonderful job at. So so I'm going to turn it over pretty quickly to Betsy, and then the other Betsy on our board, Betsy McFarland, back there, is going to join in with her facilitation skills. Together, we're going to look at what we can do going forward. What can we do now? What will we do in the future? And how do we prepare ourselves to be most effective with the new tools we will use and we will be able to teach others to use? So anything I've missed in that setup, do you
I
think?
don't think so, but Joyce, the room is divided perfectly for the round that I suggested to Betsy McFarland to sing.
Good deal. I'm in on that. We've been figuring out how we could sing somehow in this presentation. So, all right.
All right. Uh-oh, where's this? Hi. Joyce has tasked me to talk with you about our relationship with change, our resistance to change, and the utter inevitability of the change from which we reflexively recoil, and the disruption that looms before us. But being ACC&D, and most importantly, Joyce's resident Pollyanna, she's asked me to do so in an upbeat, end-of-conference, sort of inspirational sort of way. So it would be really low-hanging fruit to stand up here in front of a lot of visionaries and innovators and ask you to accept the sort of all-too-common hyperbole surrounding innovation and disruption. It's easy to sensationalize and imply that the antonyms of the word change are words like complacency and death, and fatalistic quotes like change or die are sort of reminiscent or at least suggest obsolescence is imminent. And at first blush, change conversations want to be about our personal relationship with change and whether or not we inherently or systemically embrace change or whether we reflexively recoil from it. The world seems divided if you read the papers and study business case studies between these two really divergent types of personalities, the people who are change haters and people are the people who are change hater shamers. But I'm not going to be a change hater shamer, although I may be naturally inclined to be that. Today I'm going to diverge from that. But I do think it's worthwhile to explore the discomfort that fuels our relationship to change as an individual and also as an industry, and what innovation may feel like. Change is coming, but let's be clear. Our slow, steady progress in non-surgical spay neuter and our industry's tenuous, if not skeptical, acceptance of new technologies establishes a clear basis for the ongoing role of surgical spay neuter, at least for a little while. Surgical spay neuter is justifiably sitting in the catbird seat. And as someone smarter about change than I am said, we need to recognize that the incumbent has earned the right to the throne and that any challenger really does need to prove its worth. With regard to accepting change, it's helpful to understand that growth is derived from discomfort. Personal or industrial advances and innovation typically, if not always, involves leaving the status quo, leaving our comfort zone, and being uncomfortable. If you're comfortable, it is valuable, if not inherently important, to ask yourself, do I stay comfortable or shall I grow? Because the two are typically mutually exclusive. Getting up early and going to the gym or going for a run isn't easy, but it is the only way through that discomfort that you're going to get stronger. So personally, many people feel so threatened by the possibility of discomfort that they create excuses for why change is not possible. Sometimes they blame others for their condition of their situation. While feeling helpless or victimized is not a great feeling to any of us, it is sometimes less threatening than the possibility that you're actually in control of your own destiny and that you have the power to change it. And it is easy to see how that plays out organizationally. I think Gregory alluded to some of this earlier. Growth will only happen when we accept the risk of change, and we've got to get comfortable with discomfort. We might also keep in mind that the heady moments of early innovation and change are super fun, but organizations, like individuals, have these come to Jesus moments when they must decide to commit boldly to new opportunities or circle the wagons and recoil. I'll give you an example of this tenuously emotional moment to which we may all be able to relate because we've all had this experience personally. Beginning a new relationship is lots of fun, but new love is often a fantasy bond. We're madly in love, in a state of limerence. The illusion of oneness and superconnectedness may exist in the place of really relating to your new true love. True love in quotes, right? But then upon implementation, I always fall back to business terminology, when things get real, this is when our relationships tend to start to deteriorate. We start out really open, but then we become afraid and start to protect ourselves from vulnerability and start to shut down. We've all seen this happen in ourselves or with our friends, or horrifyingly when we feel our love interest doing what we affectionately call in my family the slow back away. In organizations, or maybe, as we've seen in some cases with neuter, sol, and Zuterin, whole industries have this moment of perceived vulnerability, and that's when we decide to circle the wagons. This is risky because of lost opportunity and the chance, the legitimate chance, that you're going to fall behind. That being said, there may be a few of us in the room who are constitutionally inured to the discomfort of growing pains, and therefore represent a different kind of risky, a legitimately scary subset of the industry of its own accord. And some of us may be so frustrated with the status quo that the discomfort associated with change seems like a welcome diversion to just doing the same old thing day after day. We may, those of us, from time to time, need to remind ourselves to resist change, consider the implications of change carefully, and then change also carefully. Regardless of your relationship with change and discomfort, the last few decades have seen unprecedented growth. You can't deny that. And most of us are the better for it. Examples across all industries herald stories of smashing the status quo to the horror and the detriment of established businesses like taxi companies and to the delight of the consumer. Who here likes Uber? Who here likes Lyft? All right, Uber and Lyft. Yay. So let's talk about market disruption and innovation. So in the context of Pet Finder, which was my world, which launched in the late 90s, and various projects before then and since then, including my latest venture, the house call veterinarian business, it's fairly clear that I can't resist a market vacuum. You can imagine my elation when being a disruptor became super cool in the 90s. I found myself being described as a disruptor in a way that felt much more deeply satisfying than it did when Mrs. Burroughs, my beleaguered second grade teacher, accused my best friend Alice and me of disrupting her class when we were exploiting gaps in the lesson plans. So my credentials to discuss this are that I've been labeled a disruptor for 43 years. I've done a bit of market exploiting, and because Joyce says so. So with my credibility firmly established and being the resident Pollyanna, I want to talk about what disruption really, really is. So I want to get a taste of the room. Are we disruptors, or are we for evolutionary change? So raise your hand if you think disruption sounds exciting and good. Really high so we can see it. Is that half? How about those of you who feel much better embracing a concept of evolutionary change? We got a few more disruptors here. That's not surprising, is it? So for the sake of our discussion today, you can decide how you feel about this later. I'd like to suggest that we all agree that disruption is really just a very, very, very rapid form of evolutionary change. So at least superficially, what we're really talking about only varies as a matter of timing. It's also important to consider who are the stakeholders. If there's going to be a disruption, or if there's going to be change in an industry, you have to have a status quo that exists between a provider of goods and services on the one hand, right, a company, an organization, or an industry, and a consumer of those goods and services. We'll call that the market. In our case, I'd like you to consider that we don't really have any idea, nor can we have any idea, of who that provider of goods will be. And furthermore, we may not have yet met our consumer. So now that we've settled on a little context, we're going to get to the meat of innovation disruption. There are usually two elements that follow the creation of an innovative technological advance that immediately preceded disruption in the marketplace. Or to say that in another way, when a company or an organization is damaged by technological changes or advances in the marketplace, there are usually two factors at work. Now, these two factors are potentially really relevant to our conversations about getting our industry ready for non-surgical sterilization. The first factor is that the new technology usually represents a set of performance attributes that are not yet valued by the existing customer base. You want me to say that again? The new technology, or the innovation, presents a different set of performance attributes that aren't yet valued by the existing customer base. They may be valued by a future, underserved, or otherwise ignored set of consumers, but we don't know about those guys yet. And then the second factor is that the performance attributes then improve so rapidly that the new technology can invade established markets. So think about this in the context of Pet Finder. The internet in 1995 was a risky place to advertise, fraught as it was, with weird bulletin board trolls, eggheads, and perverts. An established humane society, like Big City Humane Society, with a well-established presence, didn't necessarily need to withstand 1,200 baud modem speeds and the fear of tawdry adopters. But the animal control agencies, the sheriff's office, and the rescue groups, with little to no public presence at all, jumped at the chance to get to advertise when a groundwater hydrologist called them and asked them if they wanted to get their pets online. For many, this was the first ever introduction, ever, to the public. Within a few years, the technology improved, and millions, literally millions of visitors were scrolling through the pets at lightning speed. Aunt Mary's Doghouse and Animal Rescue Force were foster-based groups that were quadrupling their annual adoptions and capacity and getting an overrepresented share of the digital traffic. The large established organizations, on the other hand, were originally overserved by their community, right? They're the only ones that anybody knew about. with little to no, and they and the community had little to no awareness of the smaller groups who were essentially a yet-to-be-developed market. The foster groups were underserved, and their low expectations for service and lack of other options made them the perfect incubator for market innovation. Ultimately, the established organizations started clamoring for their rightful market share, lots of times by the telephone to me. And then by then, internet speeds and digital imaging had advanced to allow for the process to actually fit into more established programs, and staff at the larger shelters were assigned to get their pets online. So furthermore, it's important to recognize that if you were, at the time, a big computer company like IBM selling huge mainframe computers to loyal big customers who need huge mainframe computers, a new miniature computer technology starts to appear, and you'd start to do an analysis of this innovation in tiny but slow computing. And probably you would determine, just like they did, that it doesn't really suit the needs of your loyal customer base. You might even go out, if you're really forward thinking, and ask your loyal customer base if they have a need for tiny, slow computers. Because there's no context in the workplace in their daily operations for tiny, slow computers, they'd probably say, no thanks, but we would like better service for our giant, fast mainframes. It would be hard for IBM to justify to their customers taking valuable and limited resources and redirecting them to an unusable, unstable, untested, unwanted innovation. Fast forward, though, a couple of years, and you know the rest of that story, right? The technology advanced so rapidly that tiny computers became as fast as mainframes, but the big established company with the big established market had justifiably not invested in tiny computer technologies for all the right reasons. So we go back and help prepare our colleagues and stakeholders for what's to come after we leave here, right? We're all going to go home and share stories of what we learned. I think it's important to recognize that we all have a responsibility to resist change a little bit, at least a little, and to consider new technologies carefully, but to do that with an awareness that there's no historical basis at all for really being able to predict how and who this innovation that we're talking about will benefit. And we really know only one thing for sure, and that is that the consumer, the folks on the ground trying to get control of pet reproduction, they're going to win. The consumer will always win. And that consumer group will probably be at first represented by a tiny subset of consumers that don't yet exist as an identifiable group. And the technology that they take advantage of will likely be, initially, completely unsuitable for the larger group. It'll be too expensive, too impermanent, too risky. But then rapid advances will occur and the technology will become ubiquitous. And voila, evolutionary change, whether it's fast or slow, has occurred. You don't have to be a geneticist to see the implications here. How does this relate to us today, though? Well, this process has always been at the core of ACC&D's vision. Harken back to the business analogy and consider that in our scenario, established sterilization programs are the IBM. They are necessarily accountable to their donors and communities to use the tools that are available to address population issues. And to borrow an analogy from John Boone, even if that means they simply have their thumb over the end of the garden hose, consider that there hasn't yet existed also an obvious market for non-surgical sterilization that compels big pharma to make the major investments in this area that we've been waiting for so that we can turn the water off at the tap. We have a need that isn't being met. But this time, we have a perfect scenario of potential innovation and disruption combined with a neutral third party. That's us, who don't have an existing consumer to whom we're responsible. We, the attendees, the stakeholders, the board members, by joining arm in arm and walking lockstep, buffer our own organizations and our own agendas from some of the risks and discomforts associated with growth and innovation. Together, as ACC&D, we can emotionally and organizationally afford to invest in the new technologies, even when it's not quite yet justifiable for established animal welfare or veterinary organizations to do so, directly at least. This collaborative effort can fuel innovation, research, field readiness, and potentially will create a new paradigm for the care and nurturing of dog and cat populations worldwide. This is who we are, and there's a lot to be excited about. Betsy's gonna make you tell us why.